There's never been a better time to have SiriusXM. With even more exclusive content, with over 150 channels in your vehicle, including the widest, deepest variety of music, ad-free. Root for your team. Get news. Listen to whatever makes you laugh. And hear all about your favorite stars. Your Platinum Plan offer includes more than ever before to enjoy online, on your phone, or at home. Create your own ad-free personalized stations powered by Pandora. Hear ad-free extra channels filled with music and enjoy favorite shows with SiriusXM Video. Thousands of hours of shows and performances on demand. What you love is on now.
Audiocontrol, the brand that's known for making good sound great, is of course a mainstay within the OEM integration category. And on today, they've opted for a unique presentation during this workshop that's going to explore 5 incredibly relevant scenarios and applications of vehicles to help you integrate into them using audio control tools. This is CMA Workshop, presented by SiriusXM, Audiocontrol, and it starts now. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in this Monday for CMA Workshop, where we get brands to show you some tips, some tricks, and how-tos to improve your efficiency in the shop and maybe teach you a thing or two that you may not have known before. I'm your host, Ben Wu, and like I said at the top of the show, we've got audio control today during our OEM integrations sessions, which have been going incredibly well. Thanks so much for your feedback. Obviously, this is a category that has a lot of your attention because it's something that we deal with every day in the shop. How do we get the signal out of these factory OEM systems, which I'll be honest, don't seem like they're getting any simpler. But luckily for us, we've got brands like Audiocontrol to the rescue. So let's first reach out to their Canadian exclusive distributor at Gemsen, our good friend Dave Singh.
Good afternoon, Ben. How you doing?
Hey, Dave. How are you? Hope you had a great weekend.
I can't complain. Everything's good. Now just got to deal with the upcoming rain season that we have to look forward to as summer nears its end.
Well, I don't want to talk about the end of summer quite yet, but what I do want to talk about is audio control when it comes to OEM integration. Audio control is a little bit of a unique, brand with a unique offering within this space. There's a lot of brands that are kind of specific to, LOCs and that type of thing. And then there's other brands which have interesting modules. Audio control has a full range, doesn't it? It makes it kind of unique.
Absolutely. The name audio control in itself, I think, is very self-descriptive as to what the basis of the company was, controlling audio. And, it's over almost 45 years old now, but they have strong roots in professional audio, home audio, obviously car audio, and signal processing was one of the things that they were the most known for. Way back in the day in the competition circuit, such as Iasca, the winning combination always utilized some sort of audio control equalizer or processor. Now, fast forward to today, where we're dealing with complex cars and source units where you want to keep those source units into the car, you need some sort of device that's going to allow you to take that signal from that factory vehicle and manipulate it or change it into something that's useful that can go into your high-performance aftermarket amplifiers and speakers.
Absolutely. And audio control kind of checks the boxes on that, let's call it sequence of events or sequence of devices required to, access that signal and use it so that we can upgrade our customer sound systems. Now, dealers are in for a treat today. We're not, guys, just so you know, we're not going to go through a catalog today. It's not even really a product presentation. This is truly a workshop. And Matt Palumbo, who's joining us today, certainly put a lot of work into figuring out what are these very relevant applications that are available right now, and kind of will show you exactly how we can use audio control products to solve some of these problem vehicles. So having said that, that's why I think dealers should tune in. What do you think? Why do you think dealers should tune in today, Dave?
Well, aside from what you said, Ben, I think dealers need to be aware of the different types of solutions that audio control brings to the table. Remember, they got very deep roots in signal processing. Now they've taken that signal processing history and even signal measurement and integrated that into their current products. Only recently did they get into amplifiers. So imagine now taking a high performance powered amplifier and integrating some of the devices such as an LC7i, which is a three-way summing device with Accubase, and putting that into an amplifier, which minimizes the amount of hardware that you have to put into the vehicle, saves the customer money because it's all built into the amplifier, and certainly eliminates things such as noise and that sort of thing that can be picked up in the cable. So I think the approach that Audio Control has taken by integrating this into their amplifiers is going to be particularly interesting to dealers, and I think Matt will do a really good job explaining how our solutions can deal with some of the difficult vehicles that we're dealing with today.
I'm going to say it's a debate whether they added an LC2I to the amplifiers, or did they add the amplifier to the LC2I? I don't know. That's up for debate. We'll see what Matt says. On that note, let's go ahead and bring in our specialist. He is the National Sales Manager of Audio Control. We love him because he comes on and teaches us a bunch of cool stuff. What's going on, Matt?
How are you this morning?
I'm doing very well. Tell us,
Good.
why is Audio Control a solutions specialty brand, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Couple of things. I mean, obviously, we've been doing it a long time. Audio Control is kind of one of the originators or leaders in the OEM integration category. I like to sometimes say we've made it okay to keep your factory head unit long before you had to keep your factory head unit. We've made that okay even back when you could easily replace a radio. We were still making it easy and easy to do and still make those systems sound great. And then these days, like you guys mentioned a little bit, we've taken it to the next level and now integrated that technology into our amplifiers, added it into signal processing and things like that as well. So there's so many options from Audio Control to make today's vehicles sound great and try to take some of the challenge out of them as well.
Very, very cool. Now, I kind of gave our audience a little bit of a preview as to what we're going to learn today. I want you to kind of break it out. How did we come to this? Where did this information come from?
Yeah.
How did you prepare for today's workshop?
Absolutely. So what I did is I talked to our tech support team and I said, hey, we're going to be talking about OEM integration, and what I really want to do is hit on some key vehicles that these guys are seeing in the bays every day. And so what I did is I talked to tech support and I said, hey, give me the top 5 vehicles you guys get the most calls on. What are those top 5 most popular cars or trucks that you're getting the most phone calls on? And I don't think the vehicles will come as any surprise to anyone, but they're good ones to address. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that these are options as to how to get these vehicles done. That doesn't necessarily mean they're the only way to get them done, but it's one way to do it, and it's a great way to be able to still say yes to these vehicles.
Yeah, we love saying yes to vehicles. That just means profitability in the shop. Can you give us a breakout of these 5 vehicles?
Absolutely.
And we can get started?
Yeah, for sure. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about late model Ford trucks. Or Ford trucks and SUVs, I should say. We're talking about GM trucks and SUVs, Dodge Rams specifically from the Chrysler family, as well as the Jeep Wrangler and Gladiator, and then the Honda Civic and late model Accord and other popular Honda models. So those are kind of the top 5 that we get the most calls on.
All right, well, let's dive in, guys. Buckle up, take out your notepad. 5 vehicles which more than likely have been coming to your bay in the last year. All right, let's get Matthew all set up.
Absolutely.
And fire away. You have the stage, sir.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, so with Audio Control and what we're doing with integration and mobile audio these days, there's obviously a lot going on there, but I wanted to kind of quickly touch on some of the probably the most popular integration devices we offer, things I call everyday upgrades, right? You're getting vehicles in that are just looking for a base package maybe, or just want to add a simple amplifier or something like that. So I do want to cover those couple of models before we dive into those vehicles. And these are just popular models that you're going to see in and out of the bay and stuff that you're going to run into. And what I really like to touch on with these is that there's a common misconception that with our product lineup, that it's kind of like a good, better, best or something like that. It's really not. It's really more about what the signal in the vehicle needs. What product do you need to interface with that vehicle and the type of signal that you'll be dealing with? So for example, if you're using a RTA and you're analyzing the factory signal in this vehicle and you discover that, hey, you know what, I got lucky. This vehicle actually has a flat, clean signal. And by flat, I mean that it doesn't have some crazy EQ from the factory, or that it doesn't have bass that drops off at a certain volume, or permanent high pass filters or anything like that. If you're dealing with a fairly, let's call it normal signal, flat and clean, and that means that the signal rises and falls with the volume knob, and it rises and falls, consistently, then you could use an LC1I for interfacing with that vehicle. It's going to be just a high quality LOC. It'll accept up to 40 volts of high level input, as will pretty much everything we build. Without getting super, deep dive into all the specs, that basically means you can use it on every vehicle out there. There's really not a vehicle on this planet right now that we can't use audio control products with. So LC1I is great for that. It's going to be just a high quality LOC. It has built-in load generation. It has 3 different turn-on modes to help you generate a turn-on out for your amplifier. And it also has some noise fixing in there as well. If you're getting a turn-on pop or engine whine or something like that, it does have a ground select built in there as well. And all the switches are internal, so you can get to them quickly and easily. Now, if you have a vehicle where as you're analyzing that signal, we get into it and go, hey, you know what? This thing actually has bass roll off. As I increase the volume, there hits a certain point where the bass just drops off, or the bass plateaus and it doesn't get any louder, right? Those are the vehicles where a 2i Pro is going to come in handy. This is everything that an LC1i is, but with AccuBass. And we'll talk about AccuBass here in just a second if you're not already familiar with that. The other bonus to a 2i Pro is that it does come with an ACR1 bass knob, which is a high quality potentiometer. It's a metal housing. It's a easily flush mounted bass knob as well. So if you are one of the shops that likes to take those apart and pilot a hole and then flush mount those, they're a great piece to be able to flush mount. Now, on the latest piece in this lineup, the Epicenter Micro, this is going to be when you run into those vehicles that they have a permanently high passed signal, which means there is no bass in the signal path, regardless of where you tap in. And if you haven't ran into this yet, you will, or maybe you've ran into this and just didn't know it yet. That's the most common thing I run into when I'm going out, talking to dealers, doing trainings, things like that, is usually when I bring up a vehicle and I say, hey, if you ever ran into one where there was just no bass, no matter what you did, I'll usually see a couple of guys in the room, kind of light bulbs go off, and you'll see a tech and a sales guy kind of look at each other and go, oh yeah, whisper, whisper, whisper. Remember that car last week? We couldn't get to sound good. And that's probably what they ran into, was a vehicle that just had no bass. And I'll give you guys some examples of those here in a minute. But with the Epicenter Micro, this is a high quality LOC. It's everything that an LC1i is, mixed with the technology of an Epicenter. So it can be used as just a standard standard line level in, RCA level in, just small Epicenter if you wanted to use it that way with an aftermarket radio, but it can also be used as a LOC/Epicenter and do it all in one little box, which is a great way to go. It also comes with the new ACR4, which is a really cool piece. This is our dual concentric knob. So this has an outer ring for Epicenter effect, that restoration, and then it has the inner knob for actual sub level. So again, you take that piece apart, flush mount it, and you end up with one knob that does 2 functions. Customers love that. Techs love not having to put in 2 knobs anymore. So very cool piece, and solves a lot of problems. When we get into kind of what some of that stuff means, just a brief reminder on AccuBass, when I talk about vehicles that have bass roll off or bass plateau, you have undoubtedly ran into this at some point. If you've been installing for any length of time, you have ran into this, even if you didn't know it. Usually what happens is you get the system installed, you think everything's good, you turn up the radio to 3/4 volume, like a lot of people get taught to do, and you start setting gains and things like that. And you think you get it sounding pretty good, and then you turn the volume down on the radio, and now you notice that the bass is actually louder than it was at high volume. Well, you undoubtedly have ran into a vehicle that has bass roll-off or bass plateau. So what AccuBass is designed to do is literally compensate for that roll-off. If we have a radio where the volume goes up to, volume 60, but at volume 40, the bass doesn't get any louder, AccuBass is designed to fill in from that volume 40 to volume 60. That's exactly what it does. So with that, the way that it actually kind of works is as you're driving, it's going to fill in that space, like I said, where you go to roll off that, where that bass actually rolls off. That's where AccuBase is going to fill in. And we have lots of great resources on how to set that up too that we can touch on a little bit later. With the Epicenter Micro too, same idea, guys. Like I said, if you're dealing with a vehicle where there's a permanent roll off, a lot of you are going, well, what does that look like? How do I know it has a permanent roll off? If you are digging into any of these vehicles and finding that there is just no bass output on any of the channels, that's where the Epicenter is going to come into play. And I'll show you an example here in a second. With the Epicenter, though, you have to remember it is different from AccuBase. AccuBase and Epicenter are not the same thing. I always touch on that every chance I'm given, because it's the most common misconception out there is, hey, I bought an amplifier from Audiocontrol. It has AccuBase built in. Cool, I don't need an Epicenter. AccuBase is going to solve my problems. That can lead to disappointment because they're not the same thing and they don't work the same way. Where AccuBase is filling in bass that has dropped off, because of, factory processing and that sort of thing, the Epicenter is actually going to create bass that was never there, potentially because that bass was, high passed by the factory or something like that. Or it could be just because of the type of music you're listening to or the source you're listening to or that sort of thing. So with that, the examples I like to show too are just a couple of vehicles with a permanent high pass filter. Now, these are just some general scenarios, but here's a 21 Sentra and a 2018 Accord. And if you look at those RTA readouts, you'll notice that both of them are lacking severely in the bass response department. If you don't know what you're looking at, the far left-hand side of that RTA output should be basically flat along the blue line in the middle of the screen. You'll see that it is severely lacking. And this is if you tie into basically every speaker output in that vehicle, and this is the response you get. If you're getting that same response on every channel, that's a vehicle that's permanently high passed, and there's not going to be anything you can do about that other than replacing the radio or putting in an Epicenter product to restore that bass back into the system. So with the different integration products and things like that, that kind of covers the basics as far as the everyday integration pieces, the stuff you're going to use for bass packages and things along those lines. With this type of integration, this is fairly, simple stuff. Like I said, adding bass packages, etc. What we really wanted to talk about today, though, was more along the lines of, where do we get with all this stuff? How are the customer service teams and the tech support teams dealing with these calls coming in with these common vehicles? How are shops dealing with these common vehicles? And one of the things I wanted to bring up before we dive into those cars is, how do you know what product to use unless you're testing that signal? So I always like to bring up the DMRTA, not just because it's a shameless plug. Yes, it is a shameless plug, but also because if you don't have some sort of RTA, oscilloscope, voltage meter, if you don't have a product or a tool that can do these things, you're going to need one. If you're going to do mobile audio installation as a career, if this is your gig and this is what you want to do, you need the right tools to do it. Right? You wouldn't go in and try to install without a drill. You would never just use a screwdriver all day, right? It's the same thing. We don't just use a test light all day. We use a digital multimeter. This is the same idea. We need stuff to be able to do these jobs correctly. We need the right tools. And the DMRTA is the right tool for OEM integration. This is going to give you your O-scope. Now you've got an RTA, you've got a voltmeter, a polarity checker, and an SPL meter, all in one product. It's an easy piece to take into the car. You can use it with an iPad or a tablet. You can use it with a laptop or a smartphone. And it's an easy way to be able to check that signal. Again, if you don't have something to test that, you're literally guessing. If you have no way to know that this vehicle has no bass in its signal other than finishing the install and finding out at the last minute, that's really not a great way to do that, right? If you're not testing, you're guessing, basically. So with that, let's dive into some of these different kind of use cases, some of these different vehicles that are out there. As we look at some of these vehicles, the thing that I like to bring up as well is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and that is just because I'm showing you a scenario and a solution to some of these vehicles doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way to do it, of course. And the thing that I like to point out is products like, say, the Pack Amp Pro, There's others out there as well, the Nav TV Zen modules, the Metra DSPT harnesses, things like that. With those products out there, there are preamp solutions. And the thing that I've been trying to train even our tech support department on is, let's recommend those products if they're available for each vehicle. So what I'm getting at is, just because you can do a car without a preamp module doesn't mean you should. If there's a preamp solution like a Pack Amp Pro or something similar available, by all means, I suggest using it. You're going to get a better result, and the install is going to be way faster, much, much easier for you to do. And the results are going to just be better in the end. Now, that being said, I do like to always have a solution to get a vehicle done today if necessary, because let's face it, you don't always have these things in stock. Maybe you can't get them, maybe they're on back order, whatever the case may be. So I like shops to always have an opportunity to still get that customer, get that vehicle in the bay, get the job done, get that money in the till, so to speak, and do it today without having to special order things or wait for products to become available or be released. So let's dive into some of the actual use cases here and some of those different vehicles. Dave, did you have something you wanted to add there before we kick in?
It was going back to the epicenter side of things, but I think I'll just wait till the very end to ask, now that we've kind of moved on to some of the other topics here.
Okay, no worries. I just want to make sure I gave you the chance to speak if there was something you wanted to add. So, and yeah, feel free to chime in if there is something. So. With that, the first one I wanted to talk about a little bit is these late model Ford trucks and SUVs. A lot of these are coming with premium sound. A lot of them are vehicles that maybe some of you aren't familiar with yet. Maybe some of you haven't done a new Bronco. Maybe some of you haven't done a new, Platinum F-150 or something like that. And they can be intimidating. You get into some of these vehicles and they have a, B&O premium system or something along those lines. Now, there are, as I mentioned, preamp solutions for a lot of these vehicles. And if there is a preamp solution and it's available to you, by all means, use it. Now, I'm not saying don't use audio control. I'm saying use that preamp solution and then feed that signal into a great sounding audio control amp. You'll have a fantastic result. But if for whatever reason that interface is either not available or doesn't exist yet, or whatever the case may be, we still like there to be options to do these vehicles. So with this one, let's talk about the new Bronco and the newer Ford trucks. What we would suggest doing in a lot of those vehicles is, if it's a premium vehicle, you're probably going to need to either go preamp or do what I call channel for channel. Excuse me. So with channel for channel, what I'm really suggesting is essentially going, channel, one channel in, amplify it, send that channel back out, bring in channel 2, amplify it, send it back out. As we're doing that, we're probably using a DSP as well. So something like a D4.800 as shown on the screen. And we're able to then make some tweaks, tweak some things to the EQ, maybe flatten the response a little bit, or, boost some things a little bit if they need it. But overall, what we're getting at when we say channel for channel is we're not summing, we're not combining channels. We are basically just amplifying what the factory has done. Now, keep in mind with these systems too, these don't always have to be something where we do summing and all that. I think in this, in this industry, we have been kind of conditioned to where we go, okay, we have to sum signals, we have to get things back to flat and clean, and then send them out to an amplifier and distribute them through crossovers to the correct speakers. Now that works in a lot of vehicles, but in some of these late model vehicles where there's too many channels, or there's just no good way to do it because of all the all pass filters and dynamic EQ and factory time correction, things like that, sometimes channel for channel is going to be your best bet. Now, sometimes you can get away with doing some summing and combining channels even on some of those premium systems. If there is a T harness, and there's one available, I'm showing you a few options off to the side there. Now these are LPH harnesses from Pack. LPH harnesses are going to go behind the radio. So those would usually be for a non-premium sound vehicle. An APH harness would usually be used at the factory amplifier. So it just depends on your application. I just wanted to show some examples that those are out there. And even if you're not using an Amp Pro or a Nav TV Zen or whatever preamp solution, you can still buy and order and use some of those T harnesses just to make the install a little cleaner and take the guesswork out of some of the speaker wiring as well. Now all of your channels are labeled, everything is cleanly wired up, and you're not cutting anything. When we're talking about a brand new vehicle, a lot of times that is a deal breaker for some customers. Is they don't want their factory wiring cut up in their 2022 Ford Bronco, something like that. So I totally understand that, and that's where those harnesses make a lot of sense. Down at the bottom too, you'll see I am suggesting LGDs. We always recommend using load generating devices on any system where you're going to be kind of interrupting that factory signal. Basically, if the factory head unit or factory amplifier is no longer going to see the impedance load from the factory speakers, then we need to put in an LGD. And that means every channel in the vehicle needs to be loaded down. So if we are doing a newer Bronco, and let's just say it has 6 channels of output, we would want to load all 6 of those channels with LGDs to make sure that we are showing that factory amplifier or factory head unit a impedance load. And not only are we maintaining the correct factory kind of setup there and tricking it into working, we're also prolonging and we're prolonging the lifespan of that factory amplifier or factory radio. Because remember, just because you got away with it, just because you got the vehicle finished and it went out the door and it didn't come back the next day, doesn't necessarily mean it was done right. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't come back, a year down the road or something like that. So we always suggest LGDs in any late model vehicle. With those Ford vehicles too, here's just a good example of how a great shop got one of these done. They used our D4.800. You'll notice that the factory amplifier is still in place. They essentially just took signal from that factory amplifier, used that in conjunction with a Phoenix Gold subwoofer there, the tailgate loaded enclosure, and put together a really nice sounding system in that Bronco. They used a JBL kind of overhead sound bar as well. And they did kind of a cool hybrid system where they utilized some of the factory channels, added an amplifier, got the customer some bass. It's a unique system. It's maybe not something you do every day, but they didn't go wild, right? There isn't 4 amplifiers and a bunch of craziness in there, but I'm sure that that Bronco is a really good sounding system, and it's very clean. It's very simple. When put back together and said and done, most would probably never even know it was, aftermarket if they didn't know any better. So some cool stuff there. So getting into the Ram trucks, with the late model Rams, obviously anything in the Chrysler family, there is lots of options. There's lots of choices. There's a ton of different, packages and trim levels and audio systems and all that stuff that can come with these vehicles. But the point that I like to make with the late model Ram trucks is, although some of these can have a high channel count, you're getting into systems that sometimes have, dozen channels or more. The thing to keep in mind too is that these are not inexpensive vehicles. Looking at the white Ram Dually that's on your screen right now, that is a post 100K truck. Okay, that truck was listed for like $120,000 US, and that sold just a couple of weeks ago. That is, not a cheap price tag, obviously. That's an expensive truck. So I think the thing to keep in mind here, guys, is as we're looking at these systems, there's going to be some times where I'm suggesting multiple amplifiers to get the job done. Some of you may be going, oh, yeah, right, my customer will never go for that, or who's actually buying that many amplifiers, that sort of thing. You might be surprised. I mean, keep in mind that customer spent over 100K for that truck. So do you really think they're going to have a big problem with spending a couple $1,000s on amplifiers? You may be surprised, but probably not, right? It's not that hard to get a lot of these guys to kind of bite the bullet and go with the right products for their vehicle. The thing that drives me the most crazy, and I see it all the time in my travels, in my talks with dealers, in the trainings that I do, is shops trying to use too simple a product for too complicated a vehicle. They're trying to use a basic 6-channel sounding device, an LC6i or an LC7i or something, in a brand new Ram that's loaded to the hilt and has 1 million speakers in it. And it's like, the 7i is a great product, but it's not the right product for that vehicle. And that's the key kind of takeaway from this, if you ask me, is making sure that you're just using the right stuff when it comes to that specific vehicle. So what we would do in a lot of those late model Rams is, again, go channel for channel. Now, if there is a preamp solution, again, I'm going to reiterate this throughout this whole presentation, use it, you guys. If there is a preamp, use it. Okay. Now you can take that signal and now feed it into a nice DSP or feed it into nice amplifiers. But if there is one there, let's use it. If not, if you don't have one in stock and you need to do that vehicle that day, or there isn't one available for that particular trim level or vehicle, then just remember you can always go channel for channel and still get some really good results. The Ram trucks are a great example of that. So let's say we're doing that white dually you saw just a minute ago. We could easily use two LC612s. Now let's say we're not doing a DSP in this truck, because maybe this truck already has some nice factory DSP options. And what I mean is maybe they already did some factory time correction. It already has factory EQ that's been applied. It already has a lot of these things where, you know, the factory tried to make the truck sound pretty good. And really what it's probably lacking is volume, which means power, and bass. That's what most of them are lacking. And so if you are to upgrade those factory speakers and add some power to them, but use the factory signals, it's not a bad way to go. Again, people are so sometimes hell-bent on summing signals and combining things together that they actually may end up making the signal way worse than it was to begin with. Keep in mind that a lot of times these OEMs spent hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars developing these sound systems, and they've put time and research and development into the tuning of that system. Now, at the end of the day, they may not have been able to use the best amplifiers and the best speakers and this and that, but the processing that went into that system was actually probably pretty good. They probably did spend a lot of time and energy time correcting that vehicle and getting all that stuff right, you know, getting those speaker placements down or whatever the case may be. So let's not necessarily mess with that if we don't have to. Let's use the work that they've done, amplify it through some great sounding amplifiers, go channel for channel, put some better speakers in there, and then let's add some bass to this thing. And I'm sure you'd be surprised sometimes at how good these systems can sound. And actually in some of them, you could even get away with, if it's kind of a budget system, amplifying factory speakers sometimes is actually even not a bad way to go, or it's a great stopgap until they can come back and afford to replace those speakers. Amplifying factory speakers can actually sound surprisingly good. If you've never tried it before, I promise you, try it out sometime, and it'll blow you away how good some of those factory speakers will sound with the right amount of power on them. So in this RAM situation, what we're suggesting, like I mentioned, is, you know, going channel for channel. If that takes two 6-channel amplifiers, so be it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's more product for you to sell. It's more installation. It's more wiring. It's more labor. It's more money in your till, and it's going to be a better sounding setup. Stop trying to just combine channels together just because you only have a 4-channel amp or a 6-channel amp or whatever available. If you need more channels, then add more channels, get more amplifiers in there. So in this case, we would be running a 13-channel system, 12 channels of mids and highs, 1 channel for bass, and I bet you that truck ends up sounding really, really good. And if we're using the right integration harness, we can get this truck done without cutting up a bunch of the factory wiring. So one of the other really common ones that our tech support team takes a lot of calls on is the late model Wranglers and Gladiators. Of course, super popular vehicle in the aftermarket, super popular vehicles just in general, right? So with the Wranglers and Gladiators, yes, shamelessly, that those Jeeps are from Amp Global. So yes, I am going to sprinkle that in there a little bit. So with those Wranglers and Gladiators, you guys, there is, of course, again, lots of options to get these vehicles done. Something we've had a lot of great success with, though, is using a D5 1300. This seems to be a really good recipe on those Wranglers, especially. So with a D5, you know, we have enough inputs on there to be able to accommodate those factory signals. We have a built-in DSP, so now we can take in those factory signals, analyze them, because it does have a built-in input and output electrical RTA. Now that's electrical, so remember, you're not plugging in a microphone to this amplifier. It is just analyzing them electrically speaking, which in OEM integration is the most important part. So we are able to take in, say, the top dash, front dash, and soundbar channels, take all 6 of those channels into that factory amp, and bring in the factory subwoofer as a signal input, analyze all of those with the input RTA that's built into the DM Smart DSP software, which is a free download. You could always download that software if you want to check it out ahead of time from audiocontrol.com. And then once we've analyzed those signals in that RTA software, we can then decide, do I need to do signal summing? Do I want to just go channel for channel, or what am I going to do here? Once we've done that, we can then feed it out to our aftermarket speakers. The thing to keep in mind, though, is I mentioned this earlier, again, we're going to want to load down those outputs in Chrysler products in particular. So Chrysler products meaning Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Fiat, Maserati, Alfa Romeo, Chrysler, any of those Chrysler family or FCA, I believe they call it now, or Stellantis is the parent company, vehicles, they all need to see an impedance load. If you try to do a Wrangler or you try to do a Gladiator, you're keeping that factory radio, you're keeping that factory amplifier, you're generally wiring in at the output of that factory amp, right? So now the factory amp's outputs, they don't go to the speakers anymore. They're now going to the input section of our D5-1300. The other side of those speaker wires, which go out to the speakers, now go to the output side of our D5-1300. The problem with that is that factory Chrysler amp no longer sees those 4 ohm or 8 ohm or whatever speakers. So in those Chrysler products, this is where the LGDs become increasingly important, because Chrysler-based vehicles will actually shut down the output when there's no load present. So if we're doing a newer Wrangler, like we're talking about right now, if there's no load present, those Wranglers will actually cut off output and you will get no sound from those signals, or from any channels in that case, if you've interrupted all of them. So what will usually happen is you'll finish up the install, everything will still work because you've opened and closed doors and kind of kept the BCM awake or alive throughout the install. And so you'll think it's all good, everything works, you'll park the vehicle, close up the doors, lock it up, the vehicle will sit long enough to go to sleep. And then the next time you start up that Jeep, it's going to check for all the speakers. And when it doesn't see an impedance load on those outputs, that's when there's going to be no sound. Now you're tearing your hair out trying to figure out what's going on. That's where the real problems start. So make sure on Chrysler products, especially everything newer than 2005, really, we recommend using LGDs, but especially on newer Chrysler products, absolutely use them every single time. They cannot hurt anything. They are omnidirectional, they are universal, they're inexpensive, and they're a great way to make sure that the system sounds as good as it can sound, is as reliable as it can be, and we prolong the lifespan of the factory electronics. We don't cause problems or have any issues coming back on us down the road. So the quick and dirty of it, I have an application guide that we have available online too. But if it's a 2018 and newer Chrysler-based vehicle and it has a factory amplifier, it's premium sound. That's Beats, Alpine, any of those premium factory sound systems. Infinity, I suppose, which is a little older, you would want to use a gray LGD. That's the LGD 60 for the premium sound systems. If it's newer than 18 and it's more of a base model where the amplifier chip is actually inside the factory head unit, then we're going to want to use the LGD 20, which is the green one. So that's going to be kind of your key to those two. If you forget which one is which, like I said, our website, our Facebook groups, all that stuff has those sorts of resources out there. They're also labeled on the package, guys, so it's not that hard to figure out. So keep in mind those LGDs are going to go between the factory sound system and whatever aftermarket you're doing. So in this example, in this Wrangler we're talking about, hypothetically, they would go between that factory amplifier's outputs and the inputs on our D5-1300. That's where we'd put those LGD 60s. And yes, we want to load down every channel we bring in. So in my scenario, I said we grabbed 6 channels of main audio plus 1 or 2 channels of subwoofer. So we would need 2 packs of LGDs to get all of that done. Each pack of LGDs has 2 of them in there, which is 4 channels total. So we would need about 8 channels in this case. We're going to need 2 packs of those guys. So just keep that in mind as you're going through this, as you're thinking about load generators and that sort of thing. The other common misconception with those is that they're built into all audio control products. They are not yet built into all audio control products. We are starting to build them into more and more. For example, they are in the LC1i, the 2i Pro, and the Epicenter Micro. So you can be sure we are working to build those into more products in the near future. So getting to the GM vehicles, current generation GM trucks, this is your Silverado, your Sierra. This also would really include the SUVs, the Tahoes, the Escalades, the Yukons, all that sort of thing. Now, the Escalades and some of those higher trim Denali's are kind of in a class of their own. We're not going to deep dive into those today. Those would be a whole 2-hour training all on their own, honestly. But let's talk about your everyday trucks, your Silverados and your Sierras, your standard Yukons and Tahoes, etc. There's a lot of ways to do these vehicles, but one of my favorite ways to do them is to use ACM amplifiers and a DM810. So with this setup, what I would be doing is taking in my signals from that factory head unit or factory amplifier, depending on if it's base model or premium sound, bring those signals into my DM810. Again, use that built-in RTA if you don't have a real DM RTA or standalone RTA tool. Analyze those signals in the DM810, and then you can decide what to do with them. If you're going to go channel for channel, which you may end up doing, then absolutely pass those signals out and make sure that you have enough amplifiers to cover all of those outputs. Make sure you have enough DSP to cover all of those inputs and outputs. If you're not going to go DSP, maybe you're just going to go literally channel in, amplify it, channel back out, then you could just use a whole bay of ACM amplifiers if you wanted to. The nice thing about ACM amps is they're compact, they're small, they are a great sounding little amplifier, but they're not a high current demand. So you could put in, a whole host of them like I've shown here. Let's say this is a high channel count vehicle and you really do need, 12 channels of power plus a couple of channels for mid bass and a channel for subwoofer or something like that. You could fit all 5 of those amplifiers easily under a seat somewhere behind a panel or make a nice little rack for them. And they're only about yay big, right? So they're not going to take up that much space. And they're really nice sounding little amps. They're not your typical micro amp where they're just small and don't sound that great or don't produce the power they claim to. Those ACMs are a great sounding little amplifier. Now, if it's a non-premium sound, if it's a base model vehicle or a vehicle where the signal's coming from the factory radio, that's where we're going to use that LPH harness that I've shown on the screen. That's, again, just an example. Make sure to look up the correct harness for your vehicle and make sure there's one available. But if there is a T harness, by all means, use it. It's going to be a easy way to grab signal there and give you something to kind of tap into, or even create your own T harness if you have the harnesses to do so. Again, with GM vehicles as well, they're not as finicky as the Chrysler based products, but you're still going to want to load down those outputs. You're still going to want to use LGDs. If we're not using LGDs in these vehicles, you're not going to get the same result. There is an audible difference in many vehicles with the sound system loaded with LGDs and unloaded without. A lot of times there is an audible difference, so keep that in mind. The other thing is you will a lot of times notice little quirks, little pops and hisses and buzzes and weird little things that maybe weren't there before, but now they are there after your install. Those LGDs will help get rid of a lot of that stuff, a lot of those annoying, weird little issues that you can't quite figure out what's going on. If you don't have LGDs installed, it's one of the first things we're going to suggest when you call support is, hey, did you load down the outputs of that with LGDs? If the answer is no, it's one of the first things they're going to suggest that you try, because it does get rid of a lot of the issues with integration that we run into. So starting to get towards the end here and wrap things up a little bit, guys, the late model Hondas. So I'm showing you a Civic, but of course this includes other popular models too, Accords, Pilots, Passports, Ridgelines, all that sort of thing. Some of the Hondas are pretty straightforward. A lot of them are pretty simple. They just have, 4 or 6 channels of speaker output. Some of them don't even feature an amplifier depending on the trim level. But no matter what, we want to have a way to get these cars done. Many of you may be aware some of those late model Civics are not what they used to be. A lot of us that are a little bit older, think of Civics as a base model car or as a basic vehicle. And you might be surprised to know that some of those late model Civics are coming with like a 12 or 16 channel system from the factory as a option or as a trim level. It's not even like the cream of the crop. It's just one of the sound systems that comes in there. It's kind of the same thing with the Accord. I think most of us in the install bay used to think of the Accord as a pretty easy vehicle to work on. You'd kind of smile when you'd see an Accord pull up because you knew it was going to be an easy day in the bay. Nowadays, the Accord has become a little bit more complex. It's a little harder to integrate with. Still not too terrible, but they have introduced a lot of things into the Accords that have made them a little bit more complicated. And that goes for the Civic as well. The new Integra is along those same lines. All of these vehicles are getting more complicated. But the point I'm trying to stress today is that you can still get that car done. Even if that means that we need, a DSP in there and we need 6 or 10 channels of amplified audio, maybe we need more than that. Maybe it's one of these new Civics with 12 or 16 channels or 14 channels or whatever it is. you can still get that car done, and it doesn't have to be a $10,000 system. If you're using relatively inexpensive amplifiers, like I mentioned in the GMs, maybe you're using the ACM amplifiers, those are not a terribly expensive amp. Selling 3 or 4 of those is not going to break the bank for most customers. Same thing if you had to do like what I've shown here. A D612 with an LC4800 is a great combination. The reason I bring these up is because, remember, on all audio controlled DSP-based amplifiers, they have an RCA output to run signal to your next amplifier. So if you need 8 channels or 10 channels of audio, but maybe there's not enough budget for 10 channels of DSP audio, that's fine. If you can get them into a DSP 6 channel like I'm showing you here, you could add an LC4 channel and run it off the signal of the D612 and still be able to do what you need to do. Or maybe you're running signal straight into the LC4800 and using its built-in signal summing capabilities to get that vehicle done. I have not personally worked on one of those new Civics, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you exactly which channels to mix and that sort of thing, because I'd be making it up. But I want you to understand that there are ways to get these cars done, and definitely don't be turning vehicles away just because you're unfamiliar or you think it's going to be too difficult to integrate with. The other thing that I always bring up in any sort of integration training or anytime I talk about doing these sorts of systems is that there's always a plan B. You should always kind of have an extra option. And, here's what I mean by that. If we're looking at some of these systems and, we're bringing in 6 channels of audio, we're doing summing, we're doing that sort of thing. And maybe at the end of the day, no matter what I do, I just can't get this system to sound the way that I think it should. Maybe it just doesn't perform the way I'm expecting. You can always have kind of a plan B in there. And this is something I always preach to my Harley shops, to anybody doing the GM trucks, anybody doing some of these vehicles that are a little bit more challenging, and they're just not getting the results that they're hoping for. If you're using like a DM608 or 810 DSP, or using any of our D series amplifiers, all of those products have the option port on there. With the option port, if you order the ACBT24, plug it straight into that port, now that amplifier or DSP becomes a Bluetooth amplifier or DSP, or Bluetooth DSP amplifier in the case of a D4800, D51300, or D612. Now, the nice thing about that is now we have an alternative. So if you're not sure, hey, is this sounding as good as it could? I keep messing with the tuning. I think I've got it sounding pretty good. Here's a quick thing that you can try. Plug an ACBT24 in there, pair the smartphone straight to the BT24 for audio, and hit play on the same song. If it sounds way better through the BT24, then it's the factory signal that you're challenged with. Because what you've just done is bypass the factory head unit, the factory amplifier, all the factory signal, and you're now sending your smartphone's Bluetooth signal straight into that amplifier and out to your speaker array or your speaker setup. If that's the case, if it sounds great when you do that, then you have a couple options. You can either go back and analyze signal and see what you have going on, or if it sounds really pretty good, but it's a little better through the BT24, then just sell it to the customer and give it to them as an option. Say, hey, look, when you just want to listen to the ball game or you're listening to talk radio or whatever, great, use the factory radio, no problem. But maybe you set them up a DSP preset that sets the Bluetooth adapter up as a separate audio input. Maybe preset number 2 is audio from the Bluetooth chip. And that's for when they're by themselves, windows down, they want to jam a little bit. Okay, great. Well, then they can switch to that and play that way. Because one of the cool things about Apple Play and those sorts of things too is, remember, most smartphones, you can have them send, or most iPhones, I should say, you can have them do CarPlay through USB so that the audio info and the maps and all that show up on the factory screen, but you can still pair the audio via Bluetooth. So you can actually be sending the audio to one place and have the visual information sent to the factory screen. And that way it'll actually appear as if it's all going through the factory radio, but truthfully, you're streaming straight into your aftermarket gear. It's a great alternative if you can't get anything else to work, or you need kind of that Band-Aid or that plan B. Having a separate Bluetooth source in there is not a bad idea. And in some of these vehicles, as they get more complicated, it's going to become that much more important. So keep that in the back of your mind as kind of an alternative. If you're getting stuck, or you have that customer that keeps coming back saying, hey, it just doesn't sound like I thought it would, it's really not performing to my expectations, plug in a Bluetooth chip, try it straight through Bluetooth, and see what the results are. If it's exactly the same, then hey, good for you. It is not anything to do with the factory signal, you integrated properly and did the best you could. It's just a little tip for you, something to try. So that's about it as far as the presentation goes. I'll toss it back over to Ben and Dave and see what they have to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. That was really interesting because it was like real life study of vehicles that are happening right now. Let's go ahead and take down this presentation. Dave, I'm going to pass you the mic here. You might have had a comment or two back in the beginning of the presentation. I'd like to give you the opportunity to make that comment.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate all the information. It was going back to the Epicenter Micro now being rejigged, let's say, for OEM integration use. So Epicenter and Accubase, two different functionalities. They work in different ways. Why can you not just, let's just say you had a DSP-based amplifier. Why could you not just EQ that bass back up? Why is Epicenter technology, unique in that sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what people do a lot with a DSP is the EQ inside it is what they're using to try to correct things. And like in your example, say, okay, 55 hertz and below is missing. So they'll go into the DSP, they'll take 55 hertz on the EQ and they'll jack that frequency. The problem is that there's no signal there in the first place, right? So although you're boosting 55, if there's no signal there to boost, then what are you really boosting? Nothing, right? You're boosting air. There's nothing there to boost. With an Epicenter, what it's actually doing is analyzing what signals are there. It's looking at what the lowest bass is that's presently in the signal, and then it's artificially putting bass in 1 octave below. So if there is bass down to 60 or 70 hertz, let's just say 70 hertz is the lowest bass in the track currently, or in the signal, I should say. The Epicenter is going to put bass in at 1 octave below, which is 35 hertz. So now that song that didn't have any bass below 70 now has bass down to 35. Or that vehicle that's permanently high passed at 70 hertz now has bass down to 35.
Cool.
It should be called Magic Bass. Magic Bass. Magic Bass. That's what that is. Yeah. Okay.
It's a catchy name. Very catchy.
It is catchy. I wrote down 2 acronyms because Matthew Palumbo loves acronyms, and so does Audiocontrol.
I do. Absolutely.
Yeah. The first acronym is LGD. Just to be clear, you made a statement during that presentation that LGD should be applied in every integration system. So I just want to begin. This has nothing to do with whether you're using an Audiocontrol LC2I or using a high level in on one of the amplifiers. You're suggesting that LGD be placed in every situation. Now, why is it? So here's my question. I've been through a couple of these presentations and nobody ever brings up a low generation type of device or application. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that,
sure.
Matthew.
Yeah. So LGD, first of all, stands for load generating device. Okay. In our products like the LC1I, the Epicenter Micro, you'll see it say load select. That's the same thing. That's the 3 different LGDs built in. One of the reasons that we don't see it, brought up by everybody or applied by everyone is most of them don't have all of the different impedances that we offer. We've seen a few out there that have some of them, but usually not all of them. Or we've seen a few copycats that have 1 or 2, but again, not all 3. And they're very different. You'll see some that say, yeah, we have built-in load stabilizing, or we'll have a stabilizing circuitry or something along those lines, whatever their marketing term is for it. But most of the time what they are is just some sort of resistor inside that's applying a load. And that's really not the same thing as a LGD. LGDs actually apply a load kind of dynamically depending on what frequency is passing through. So much like when you make a speaker, put a set of test leads on it from a multimeter, you push on the cone, you see that impedance fluctuate. It's the same idea. Same idea as an LGD. An LGD will apply a different impedance depending on what frequency is passing through it. When we're talking about, say, like the blue LGD.
Is that something that could be incorporated into amplifiers?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it's something that we are. Yeah, something that we're working on for the future, our next generation of DSPs, next generation of amplifiers, that sort of thing. We will most likely try to find the space internally to build that in. Believe it or not, it does take up a fair amount of PC board space, even in like an LC1i. Probably half the board in an LC1i is taken up by those load matching circuitry that's in there. So.
Okay. We've got an interesting question that I guess is stemming off of Dave's comment. If we could bring up this question from one of our viewers. Could we see the Epicenter technology added into the DM series DSP later on from Hoyt Richardson? Thanks for the question, Hoyt.
It's a really good question. It's a great idea too. We have worked in the last year or two to look at how we use the Epicenter and how we integrate it into other products. We don't want it to become just a box you check, right? Like we still want it to be something that is tangible, so to speak. But I could certainly see it being integrated into like a DM Pro if there was ever to be a big, awesome, high channel count DSP from Audiocontrol in the future. I could certainly see Epicenter being like an option in there or something along those lines for sure.
All right, well said. Two more items for you, Matt. The other, you really emphasized if there was a preamp solution, use it. That means a lot coming from you because I think what that represents is putting the dealer first and their business first, because at the end of the day, I think that's the message you're getting across. I want to commend you on that.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's something that when I was the national trainer, I had started working with our tech support team internally to do the same thing. I said, look, I don't care if we're suggesting the PAC Amp Pro or the Nav TV Zen or the Metra Access DSP T harness, whatever it is. If there's one available for this vehicle, please recommend it to the customer. Now, if they still choose to just use a LC7i or whatever instead, great, we'll do our best to help them. But I think it's important that as a company, we let them know that, hey, there is a better way to do this vehicle that's going to be way easier for you. And I personally think, if I was to call a company and that was their tech support's advice was to, hey, return our product and go buy someone else's, I think I would respect them for it. I think I would look at them and go, wow, that was really pretty cool. They were honest with me and they didn't just want to sell me more of their stuff or battle it through tooth and nail just to make their product work. If there was a better solution and a company suggested it, I'm going to respect them for it. And so that's the way I try to look at it.
Very nice. I do commend you for that again. Lastly, man, we don't spend enough time talking about those ACM amplifiers. I love that you incorporated that into the big multi-channel. I think it was a Cadillac or Silverado one that, they don't take up a lot of space. They pack a ton of punch. There's a lot of great multi-channel amplifier options, especially from Audiocontrol, but sometimes you don't need to go that route. And what I like about the small ACMs is you can actually build on those modular wise as you go. So I think I wanted to kind of expand that, Dave. I don't know what you think, but we were just talking about the ACMs kind of backstage before we went on, and I think those are a little jewel in the line.
Well, they're mini amplifiers, but they don't run out of steam, which is sometimes an issue with compact amplifiers. Amplifiers are large for a reason. They need massive power supplies to have the juice behind them. Where Audiocontrol has found that perfect, size where you can make the amplifier smaller, but not compromising on the amount of performance that the amplifier is going to deliver. So they've done a really good job with those amplifiers. And one of the comments we always hear about them is how much power they have. They just sound like a regular amplifier.
Well, I think that's the comments I hear of all the Audiocontrol amplifiers, to be honest with you. It's, the ACM's got jam, man. That's it. No matter what size, whichever rendition you want to look at. Okay. Before we let you go, what do dealers, I guess the question is, what's the best place for dealers to refer to find support, especially on these recent model vehicles, or get ideas and solutions?
Yeah, we've got some really good solutions for them, some really good resources, I guess the best way to put it. First, on audiocontrol.com, there's something called the knowledge base. It is highly underutilized. I'd say 80% of the questions that come into tech support, there is a write-up in the knowledge base on how to solve what it is that they're asking about. If you're looking for how to set up Accubase, what's the difference between Accubase and the Epicenter? You heard me describe it earlier, but maybe you want something in front of you to reference or to show your fellow tech or whatever. all of that stuff is in the knowledge base. The other place that is a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more interactive is our Facebook groups. So we have the Audio Control Dealer and Rep group. There's also a group called Audio Control Enthusiasts Worldwide, and something called the DMRTA group. So there's kind of 3 separate audio control groups there. You can go in and ask to be accepted into the group. As long as you're a actual dealer, they'll let you into the dealer and rep group. If you're an enthusiast watching this, by all means, join the enthusiast group. It's a great place to, like Ben said, see ideas, get ideas for, I saw somebody the other day lasered this great little panel for the ACR controller that fit perfectly into this factory cubby. Things like that I probably wouldn't have thought of, and they just did a great job. It's very, great inspiration, let's say. And then the dealer and rep group is a great place to ask questions about specific vehicles or how to interface with something, that sort of thing. So there's some really good resources out there.
Awesome. Can't let you leave without giving us the summary. You went through the work, you did the work, Matt, you put together these case studies. What is the final takeaway you hope that dealers take away from today's workshop?
Yeah, what I'm hoping they take away is that there's always a way to get these vehicles done. When I was in retail, that was always kind of my philosophy, was never tell a customer no. The only limit is really their budget, their time, their imagination, that sort of thing. The answer should always be yes, even if maybe they don't love the answer, right? Even if they don't end up doing it because maybe the price is more than they want or whatever the case may be, you as a dealer should never be telling them no because of a installation roadblock or something like that. That should never stop you from getting these jobs done. Now, may that mean that you have to order something, or that you might not have, 3 6 channels in stock to get the job done? Maybe, but what I'm getting at is I think you should always be able to get these jobs done, and there should always be some sort of a way to do it that makes the car sound better than it did when it came in. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just always being able to get these jobs done. Even the complicated ones, there is a simple way to finish them.
And I think you showed some of that today for sure. Matthew, I can't thank you enough for putting this whole workshop together, and we certainly appreciate all the insight that you brought to the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we'll see you at the next one. Take care, sir.
All right.
All right, Mr. David. It's interesting because OEM integration is ever changing, right? I mean, just look at how much it's changed in the last 5 years. Imagine where it's going to be 5 years from now. But it's nice to know that there's companies like Audio Control that kind of have their pulse on it and are adapting as time moves forward.
Here's the beauty of Audio Control. There's such a large company with lots of employees that they have the ability to react quickly when there are shifts in the industry. We're seeing load adapters being integrated into LOCs. That was something that we didn't need to look at before. Now there's the potential of integrating that into the amplifiers. Who knows what tomorrow holds? At least Audio Control is, with their in-house engineers and their staff and the resources that they have, especially now with this new marriage between AMP of America and their OEM integrations, they can marry some technologies together.
Oh, you see, I've been thinking about that since they announced it. I'm like, what's going to happen moving forward when now they have this entire division that's been doing also integrating and integration type stuff? Because you know what AMP does? AMP kind of likes to take elements or specialty features from their different companies and kind of blend them together. So I've already started seeing a little leakage of Audio Control into other presentations. I'm excited to see what the future holds. How about we leave it at that?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a pretty cool future ahead of us for sure.
All right. So if you're tuned in and you've stuck with us this far, make sure you check out the website where Audio Control, like what Matt was mentioning, as far as for resource and support, or if you want some specs on some of the items that we talked about, audiocontrol.com. If you happen to be in Canada and you're like, yep, I want some Audio Control stuff for my store, well, get a hold of Gemsen. They are the exclusive distributor for Audio Control in Canada.
One more thing, Ben, before
Yes,
let's remind everybody of that awesome 5-year warranty that Audio Control.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely worth mentioning. Let me think about what I'm going to say. Well, I haven't heard of it, and if I do, I apologize, but I can't think of another brand right now, as you asked, as we talk about it, that offers that kind of amazing warranty. So that 5-year warranty is certainly a game changer.
Let's be honest, with OEM integration, there's a lot of prodding and probing, and sometimes things will break. So
and some high voltage signal sometimes we're dealing with, especially with the amplified systems, for sure.
Have that guarantee behind you is definitely a big, big asset.
Mr. Singh, always a pleasure. This was a good one.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the time.
I'll see you on the next one. There you have it. If you're into OEM integration and you liked what you learned about today, well, you want to stick with CMA Networks right through till August 26th, because we are deep into the OEM integration sessions. Every brand, every day, OEM integration is what's on the menu. Now, we also have an awesome contest. It's almost over, so we want to remind you, you Canadian dealers out there, to sign up. It's your chance to win a Kenwood Dual Motorsports camera. We are giving one away. It's a value of $700. All you got to do is head over to the CMA Facebook page. We've pinned it right on top. Sign up. If you're a Canadian dealer, you have a chance to win it. Lastly, make sure to visit cmanetworks.com for this and many more videos. We've got a whole slew of audio control videos that we've had the pleasure to do with Matt. Check it out. Search the brand Audiocontrol or Matthew Palumbo on his own trainer profile page. That's it for this CMA workshop presented by SiriusXM. I'm your host, Ben Wu. Until next time, we connect.
I mean, yeah, this time
Stop it.
Today when I'm going to
Yo, roll it down.
I am.
You don't need a car to listen to SiriusXM. You can listen anywhere. You know that, right?
What? Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud Radio.
Kevin, you could use your phone.
What? What?
Alexa, play Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud Radio on SiriusXM.
What?
This is how I know you're getting old. I guess that was it.
What?